Good evening. The program time about the most important events of this past day. An accident has occurred at the Первомайская mine. Initial accounts indicate a minimum of 15 people have died. In Chechnya, it was decided to postpone the elections. At the meeting in Grozny, the Chechen side was presented with grievances regarding the unceasing shooting incidents. The necessary number of signatures have been collected of deputies of the State Duma of Russia to convene an urgent session on the Yugoslavian problem. In Beijing, the World Congress of Women has opened. Today, yet another tragedy has occurred at a mine. A powerful explosion occurred at the 1st of May one in Kuzbas. During this year, this is the 5th major accident. Previous to that, 4 took the lives of 22. Today's took 15. Until the last moment, there was hope that there would be fewer casualties. In detail from our correspondent. Almost completely destroyed is the building of the elevator cage shaft, which complicates the rescue effort. Extensively damaged was the building with the main fan. Such was the force of the terrible tragic explosion. This tragedy occurred at the beginning of the night shift. The miners of the Первомайская mine were conducting their regular task in working on underground tunnels. Literally a few moments before the explosion, measurements of the underground atmosphere were taken. The devices registered no aberrations. The methane content was usual, so the meters indicated. This was followed by a chain of unexplainable occurrences which specialists will still have to decipher. First, the power was disconnected, and then 5 to 7 minutes later, the wave of the explosion rumbled through the shaft. Immediately, measures were undertaken to liquidate the accident, and people were urgently brought to the surface from out of the shaft. Working at the mine currently is a geological rescue brigade, and those from Kemerovo, Leninsk, Kuznetsk, Anzhir, and Suzhensk. Nikolai Chirkov, Victor Ushurov, especially for Public Russian Television from the Первомайская mine shaft. Chechnya. In Grozny today, after a lengthy break, again, mortar explosions were heard. The brief report of TASS sounds as follows. Last night in Grozny, for the first time in the last months, the shooting at Russian positions was not only from firearms and grenade launchers, but mortar launchers as well. Today in Grozny, at the meeting of the Special Observation Commission, organizational questions of the work of the commission were discussed. Apart from that, the deputy commander of the contingent of federal forces, Pavel Maslov, and the chief of staff of the forces, Aslan Mashatov, were working out the legal status of the self-defense regiment, which, pursuant to the agreement of the 30th of July, should replace the Dudaya formations. It's presumed that the self-defense regiments will function under the aegis of the Special Observation Commission. At the same time, as experience has indicated, the backbone of the self-defense regiments are comprised of the same gunmen which are subordinate to field commanders in the given regions. In this case, the field commanders undertake the responsibility before the command of the federal forces to protect public order. The question about exchange of prisoners was not discussed today, despite the fact that Maskhadov agreed to exchange 14 military federal forces for 145 gunmen. The realization of that decision is being delayed. Today, the co-chairman of the Special Observation Commission refused to grant their traditional briefing. The sides departed without saying a word to the press. However, Aslan Maskhadov assured Pavel Maslov that the 6th of September, on the Independence Day of Ichkeria, there would be no provocations. Andrei Murtazin, Alexei Matushkin from Grozny. The election of the National Assembly in the Chechen Republic, previously scheduled by the Committee of National Accord for the 5th of November, have been postponed until full completion of the disarmament process. This was stated to Interfax by the chairman in Grozny by the deputy chairman of the Central Election Commission of Chechnya, Jacob Sabirov. In Moscow, however, the active political life continues, which is concentrated around forthcoming elections. Evidently, the agrarians are engaged in talks with the speaker, Ivan Rybkin, after a virtual breakdown and split. Tomorrow, the convention of the Agrarian Party of Russia will review, among other issues, the proposal of the speaker to create one bloc with the agrarians, the association, the labor unions at elections, the Unified Russian Industrial Party, and other associations. Such a decision was adopted today at the meeting of the board of the central management of the Agrarian Party. Perhaps a role was played by the address of Ivan Rybkin to members of the convention, in which it's noted that because of mistakes permitted during the Reformation, Russia is in a profound crisis. Under threat, according to the Speaker of the Duma, is not just its secure food supply, but also independence. And as soon as the principal divergences were marked in the positions of the agrarians and the NDR, or Our Home is Russia, on the question of private land ownership, the agrarians again resumed talks with Rybkin. Yet the plenum of the Agrarian Party of Russia decided to consider Ivan Rybkin as having lost his contact with the Agrarian Party and that he's no longer a member of the party management. Today also a press conference was held of the leaders of the Congress of Russian Communities. After holding a closed convention, the Electoral Association, the Congress of Russian Communities, had a press conference gathering a great number of journalists, but there was no sensation. Skolkov accused everyone of having staged an information blockade of Congress and, as usual, criticized the government. Glazyev praised his own financial program, and only General Levit, agreeing to play a part on the team, played the first fiddle. The question, which seat would he run for, a leader of the Duma faction or president, he felt was inappropriate. I know what to answer you, but the audience is inappropriate. He broke 2 fingers. According to a certain version, in an encounter with a thick-skulled banker, Alexander Lebedz answered purely military questions in the style of a general. If from the military political bloc of NATO one removes the military armature, then only political rags will remain there, he said, the general, dressed in civilian clothing, condemning the gendarme functions of NATO for disciplining, out of the 3 warring sides in the Balkans, only the Bosnian Serbs. After the press conference, General Levitz left on a Volvo model car. Yelena Golubeva, Mikhail Levitsky, Public Russian Television in Moscow. One of the leaders of Our Home is Russia, Alexander Shokhin, stated that following Sergei Shakrai, the majority of members of the press, or the Russian Party of Unity and Accord, will lead the NDR, Our Home is Russia. The departure of Shakrai has 2 presumable versions. First of all, the visibility of the departure to attract the smaller parties into the NDR. Secondly, Shakrai may have been sacrificed to preserve the NDR because of his remarks regarding the involvement of Bashkirian bankers in Chechnya. Possibly, Shakrai and the governor of the Sverdlovsk district, Edward Russell, will create one sole bloc. But as Russell said today, Shakrai does not aspire toward leadership of that federal bloc. The basic purpose of the Shakrai-Russell bloc will be the trump card of Shakrai, that is, regional policies. There's information regarding political events of 2 years ago. The Prosecutor General of Russia completed its investigation of the criminal case on the events of the 3rd and 4th of October of 1992 in Moscow. This was stated to Interfox today by a high-placed representative of the investigative department of the Prosecutor General's office. According to him, a resolution was passed to close that case. As you remember, it was launched in October of 1993 under the article which exerts responsibility for staging mass disorders. What was occurring then, you see currently on your screens. Later, leaders and known figures of the opposition were arrested. In February of 1994, they were pardoned. The deputy chief of the investigative department of the Prosecutor General, Leonid Proshkin, in an interview to Interfox, said that the materials of the investigation indicate that in the events of the 3rd and 4th of October in Moscow, both sides of the conflict are guilty. The amnesty was advantageous to supporters of the Supreme Soviet and the supporters of executive rule. Today we attempted to receive more detailed information from the Prosecutor General, but under various pretexts, the interview was postponed, and it's carried over until tomorrow, so details tomorrow. And now about today's events in the State Duma of the Russian Federation. The collection of deputy signatures has been completed to convene an urgent session of the chamber about the question of NATO launching a war in the Balkans and Russia's position. As Interfox was told by the organizers of the action, by this morning, 100 signatures were collected, and the number necessary to convene an urgent session is 90. All factions signed, except Yabloko, because Yablinski feels that if the question of the accordance of the Minister Kozyrev is not raised, there's no sense in discussing the problem. And the resignation of Kozyrev is outside of the jurisdiction of the Duma. The chairman of the Federative Council, Vladimir Shumeka, informed the Speaker of the Duma, Ivan Rybkin, that the laws adopted by the lower chamber regarding the conflict in former Yugoslavia automatically are considered to have been adopted by the Federative Council because the required 14 days have expired, and today those laws were sent for signature to the President. One law on measures to provide humanitarian aid, the second about measures taken by the Russian Federation to cease the genocide of the Serb nation in the Republic of Croatia. Meanwhile, on the world political arena, preparation is underway for the Geneva meeting on Yugoslavia, scheduled from the 7th to 9th of September. For now, according to ITAR-TASS, the NATO Air Force will resume bombings of the Serb positions if, within 24 hours, those don't pull their heavy weapons away from Sarajevo. Our film crew is in Zagreb, and we just received a report. It seems that the blue helmets are continuing to further lose positions in the Balkans, yielding them to NATO. In the beginning of the conflict, they did their deed. They managed to separate the adversaries and stood between them like a live shield. But during the course of the war, the UN mandate was on several times cynically trampled on. Civilized measures are feeble counterbalance to the horrors of this flipped-over peace when local leaders arbitrarily assemble fighters, loot, rape, and murder. Several times, the blue helmets were the objects of attack as well. The UN guarantees are illusory. The successful capture by the Serbs of Srebrenica and Žepa blows on other Muslim enclaves in Bosnia under its protection. It turns out, again, an inglorious epilogue as it happened in Somalia. It's not excluded, especially because the United States evidently are quite determined to achieve stationing in the Balkans of the multinational force under NATO leadership. Of the 50,000 contingent of new peacekeepers, one half will be Americans. Well, the Yugoslavian crisis is a convenient grounds to prove that the alliance lives and that life continues under Washington leadership. Evidently, it was cunning on the part of the press secretary of the UN peacekeepers staff in Zagreb, Kristianis. When he responded to the question of our program, he refuted the possibility that the blue helmets would be squeezed out by NATO forces. The underestimation of the West's resolve to create order here would mean the repeat of the sad experience of Saddam Hussein. This alone proves that, for Western democracy, forceful methods such as the Desert Storm are completely acceptable means of resolving international problems. But will NATO help the Balkan peoples to find a common language? The bombing of some and support for others is not the best means for reconciliation. Preparing for the coming Geneva conference, political figures speak out. The last, from the European Council, Carl Bildt, called the leadership of the Bosnian Serbs the main obstacle for the peace process. Details of the night and morning talks of Milosevic with the Assistant Secretary of State of the United States, Holbrooke, and Bildt, nothing is known. The resumption of transport convoys into the Muslim part of Sarajevo, observers view as the Serbs' compliance with one of the points of the ultimatum of the UN and NATO forces. Its main requirement is the withdrawal out of the 20-kilometer zone around the capital of all heavy weaponry. The ultimatum affects only the Bosnian Serbs and does not apply to the government forces. But one may remember that at one time NATO and the UN demanded the withdrawal from the so-called 20-kilometer safe zone, and it is under the protection of peacekeeping forces, all the heavy weaponry of both conflicting sides. It's not hard to notice that the situation has changed, and here a nuance surfaced which observers haven't overlooked. In their opinion, the fewer Serb weapons are aimed at Sarajevo, the more evident become the intentions of the Bosnian leadership to use the new situation to their advantage. The Muslim leaders harshly criticized the decision to suspend the bombings of Serb positions and thereby pressure NATO. Meanwhile, becoming a property of glasnost are the armed actions of the Muslim forces against the Serbs in that same 20-kilometer safe zone. Using the cover of the rapid response force, the government forces fire heavy weapons and mortar at both military and civilian objects of the Serbs around Sarajevo. These glaring facts evoked the indignation of even the highest-placed commanders of the UN force. So the commander of the Sarajevo sector, Jean-René Bachelet, directed a protest to the Muslim side, indicating that such actions are impermissible. As was noted by the French newspaper Figaro, while the Serbs in the last days have demonstrated their striving toward a peaceful solution of the conflict, the Muslims want to use that temporary weakness on their part, and this could only complicate the situation. We return to matters within Russia. The first Vice Premier, Alexis Saskovets, today visited Neftegorsk. Just recently from that region, news had been arriving that the promised government funds were not reaching them, and the problem with housing for the victims is not treated effectively. Evidently, to check the real state of affairs, the Vice Premier decided to visit. The first Vice Premier visited the construction of housing in the south of Sakhalin for victims of the earthquake of Neftegorsk. Later, Alexis Saskovets held a meeting with the local representatives of the administration where they discussed two matters: the situation around Neftegorsk and the preparation of Sakhalin for winter. The Minister of Fuel and Energy, Yuri Shafranik, who inspected the recultivated, as he called it, Neftegorsk, said that all of the work has been accomplished, and the snag is only that the builders have been paid only 1/4 of the salary they were to receive. The same situation exists with the payments of the compensation of 50 million per each victim of the former village of Neftegorsk. There was some sort of a delay in payment of compensation for the damage as a result of the earthquake, property damage. Now all these questions have found a resolution. There was, of course, success in the first phase. There where decisions were made correctly about the transfer of the incomplete construction of the residential complex for needs of the Neftegorsk victims. Anton Vernitsky, Yefim Yakovlev, Sakhalin Public Russian Television. An indefinite hunger strike was announced today by 27 mines of the Zamchalovskaya mine of the joint stock company Gukov Coal. Miners of the second largest coal mining association in Donbass are conducting this act in protest of violation of the schedule for payments of their salaries delayed since May. The situation with coal miners' hunger strikes is becoming more frequent. A few weeks ago in Rostov Coal, the matter was raised about budget funds, and then it became clear that 440 billion rubles planned for 1995 had been paid by the government. The analysis of the situation indicated that the coal consumers are delaying in their payments to the coal sector. The government, in essence, has paid out budget money. This was the case in Rostov Coal. In the Economic Chronicle of Russia, as previously, the bank topic is acute. The new waves of bank bankruptcies currently are unavoidable. This was stated in an interview to Business Tass by the head of the group of economic programs at the analytical department under the president, Mikhail Delegin. In his opinion, the reason for this is the large number of small banks oriented toward speculative operations. There could be an increase in the number of bankruptcies of major industrial companies. In any case, today, the Ulyanovsk plant was at a standstill. For now, the standstill is in effect for 1 month. At the plant's warehouse, more than 6,000 unsold cars have accumulated. So prior to manufacturing new ones, the old ones have to be sold, and that's not easy because the models are quite outdated. A new VAZ model was created, but there is a lack of money for mass production. And in the marine merchant port of Petersburg, under threat of closure is the container terminal. In this case, the reason is the inefficiency of the manner of orders coming down the vertical. Customs duties must be paid directly in the port, which probably is just, but there is a shortage of customs officials. The cargoes accumulate, and disgruntled clients are forced to pay fines for their goods sitting in customs. So now they are attempting to switch the delivery of the next cargo of goods to Russia through the ports of the Baltic states and Finland. And Russia is again going to lose. Although experts of the Center of Economic Conjecture under the government of Russia feel that in the year 1995, and by the end of the year there still is time, in Russia there will be a significant slowing down in tempos of industrial decline, especially in light industry and production of other non-food goods of national consumption, as well as industrial and construction materials. Although much will depend on the situation on the financial market. The economics minister of Russia, Yevgeny Yasin, presumes that after August of the current year, when the growth of inflation in the country was 44.6%, there are no preconditions for its further increase. Monday brought not even the slightest changes in the situation on the financial markets of Russia. This is noted by experts of Russian companies and banks. On the extra exchange currency market, a consolidation of the major commercial banks is occurring on one hand, and the average-sized ones on the other hand. That's the operators reporting. And major banks are working in isolation, making almost no transactions with banks of medium size. Financial problems exist not just in Russia, they exist in practically all the republics of the former Soviet Union. Of the 28 registered commercial banks in the Lithuanian bank, 9 are considered to be problematic. 6 have had bankruptcy charges filed. 2 are liquidating themselves. Loud financial scandals on the condition of the bank system were the topic of the meeting of the President of the Republic, Algirdas Brazauskas, in whose opinion those guilty of the fact that in banks tens of thousands of residents of Lithuania lost money should be punished. The investigative department has already been transferred the matter on the savings bank, which had enjoyed most trust of the depositors because 51% of its capital belongs to the state, and in accordance with the amendment to the law, the state guarantees payback in them of personal deposits. However, currently the State Bank of Lithuania has deprived the Sberbank of the possibility to provide credits to anyone except the government. The decision was precipitated by bad, risky loans of the bank, the last of which 4 million litas, that is 1 million American dollars. The head of the State Bank of Lithuania, Kazis Litkavičius, compared the institution he heads with the roads. He said, on the roads there are also accidents and losses with police, but for these occurrences the guilty parties are responsible, not the police. Therefore, problematic banks must solve their own problems because they've created them themselves. Only 11 commercial banks showed a profit in the first half a year. All the rest operated at a loss. 6 didn't accumulate the necessary base capital and could be closed down or forced to amalgamate with others. According to the official opinion of the Lithuanian bank, despite the episodic nature of the problems, the bank system in the Republic is stable, although this opinion does differ from the opinion of other participants of that system, the clients and the depositors. Lyudmila Lvova, Algirdas Varinovich's Public Russian Television from Vilnius. The leader of Georgia, Edvard Shevardnadze, today left for a visit to Uzbekistan. They will be speaking ostensibly of the bilateral economic ties. As soon as some ties break apart, new ones surface or are created. In Georgia itself, an investigation of the terrorist act continues virtually every day, brings new details. Today, the head of state of Georgia, Edvard Shevardnadze, commenting on the statement of the former chief of the Georgian security services regarding his resignation, emphasized, in that decision, a political overtone is present only in the sense that the security service demonstrated complete helplessness in battling terrorism. Meanwhile, in Tbilisi, the deputy head of the Rescue Corps of Georgia has been arrested, Dogo Gudashishvili. 10 people also have been detained from the personal security detail of the deputy of parliament, the chairman of the Rescue Corps, Shaba Usiliani. In all the areas of Georgia where the branches of the Marchedrioni are located, the police have conducted search and arrests. Members of the organizations have been found and confiscated from them were communications devices, weapons, and narcotics. Shaba Usiliani himself, for the fourth day, ignores the request of the prosecutor of the Republic to appear for interrogation. Georgi Ratishvili and Georgi Batzadze from Tbilisi. In Georgia, according to information being received, there's a catastrophic economic situation. The poverty level there is 168,500 rubles. Meanwhile, the average salary of the budget sphere is only 16,000. This is the data of the independent agency of the financial information of the agency GMS. Until now, such calculations were made by official services and significantly differed. 2 more reports from the CIS. In Western Ukraine, for the first time, there's a party which maintains the position of strengthening the community, the Commonwealth of Independent States, and closer ties among the former republics of the Soviet Union. The Supreme Soviet of Azerbaijan banned the functioning of the Communist Party. It's reported that the Ministry of Justice made that decision because the functioning of the Communist Party contradicts the Constitutional Act on State Independence of Azerbaijan. The Communists disagree with that decision. And from abroad. Women who arrived for their forum in Beijing in previous days had reported their disturbance over the scrutiny and persecution by the Chinese security services. There were official protests, but the meeting of the Women's Congress nonetheless did open. Today, despite all world calendars in Beijing, there's a big International Women's Day beginning here. Tuberk was the 4th World Congress of Women organized under the aegis of the UN. Such a wave of the fair agenda the Chinese capital hasn't known. More than 180 UN countries sent their delegation, among whose heads are the First Ladies of the United States, Pakistan, and other states. The greeting ceremony, opened by the President, Jiang Zemin, was concluded with the grandiose music ode to half of the sky, as in China, poetically they call women. However, representatives of state and non-state organizations gathered in Beijing not to hear deferences or compliments. 10 years passed since in Nairobi, the strategy was adopted for the fight for women's equality to the end of the century. The Secretary General of the Congress, Gertrude Mangela, stated that despite the evident progress, the elevation of the status of women in society still encounters many obstacles, and this phenomenon is international. Our norms of law are truly very progressive in the sense of not permitting discrimination on the basis of gender regarding women or men without exception. But on the other hand, we cannot not be concerned with problems which women encounter today. That is, problems of poverty, unemployment, and health of women and the population overall. The proposal of the forum will be a multilateral platform of action for the international women's movement. It not only defines women's problems, but also indicates ways to do away with them. And the main thing, the Congress intends to demonstrate that the so-called women's problems are no longer such, and men, those especially endorsed with power, must consider that whether they want it or not. Alexei Ilichov, Boris and Sifarov, Beijing, Public Russian Television. At least 8 people have died and 25 people have been injured as a result of the explosion of a powerful bomb of Srinagar, the administrative center of the Indian state, Jammu and Kashmir. The explosive device was placed in a car parked at the branch of the State Bank of India. In the opinion of the police, this terrorist act was committed by the gunmen from the separatist group of the state Jammu and Kashmir. Today in Brussels, the trial began over the alleged members of the terrorist organization, the Armed Islamic Group. The Palace of Justice justice, where the trial is being heard, is under a state of security. The center of the city is patrolled by additional regiments of gendarmes. These security measures were undertaken because of the threat of terrorist acts. The majority of the 13 accused were arrested after the discovery of the rear base of the Islamic terrorist in the Belgian capital. The armed Islamic group threatened the Belgian authorities with retribution if immediately 2 of the main accused are not released. And this group is suspected of having committed terrorist acts in France. Today in Paris, the security services neutralized an explosive device. A homemade bomb was hidden in a package not far from the metro station Commission. The package evoked the suspicion of the passers-by, who called police on time. This occurred 1 day after the explosion in the Paris market near Bastille Square, where several people were injured. Since the end of July, overall, as the result of terrorist acts in Paris, 7 people have died and more than 100 have been injured. Today in Israel, the celebration of the 3,000 years of Jerusalem begins. The organizers of the triumphant functions don't conceal that they will be held under the symbol of Jewish sovereignty over Jerusalem and the Jewish character of the city. Therefore, refusing to participate in this celebration with the European Union are several countries who object to Israel's claim to Jerusalem as the eternal and indivisible capital. By the UN decision in 1948, the city was granted a unique international status in consideration of its sacredness for the Christian, Muslim, and Judaic faiths. A powerful storm caused flooding in the Philippines. Under 3 meters of water and sludge were the villages at the foot of the Pinatubo volcano. Evacuation of those people in danger engaged the military helicopters and other army equipment. The storm, which meteorologists gave the name Nina, is the second natural disaster of such a type in the Philippines in the last week. From the official chronicle, tomorrow arriving in Russia on a visit is the chairman of the government of Spain, Felipe González, who has a difficult situation at home, as is known. Felipe González leaves Madrid at a difficult moment. Spain now has the task of chairing the European Union, a mountain of domestic affairs, and the opposition often drags the Prime Minister into endless arguments. However, the Secretary-General of the Socialist Party is a seasoned warrior. Despite the rude attacks of conservatives, the 53-year-old native of Seville, a lawyer by education, González, as previously, remains the most popular national politician. And that's understandable. During the 12 years of his term in office, the Socialists did much in order to strengthen democracy, increase the well-being of the Spaniards. At the talks in Moscow, they will mostly speak about the Russian-Spanish relations, as it was last year during the visit to Madrid of the President Boris Yeltsin. Since that time, the bilateral ties are developing evenly and purposefully, although they clearly lack dynamism and initiatives. Especially this regards the sphere of the economy and trade, where indicators are simply negligible compared to the vast possibilities of the 2 countries. Weak contacts in science and culture. What regards international questions, here are positions often coincide, which was stated by González several times. Although now we do differently see the solution for the crisis in the Balkans, where recently Spanish planes, as a part of the NATO aviation, bombed objects of Bosnian Serbs. But who knows, suddenly, perhaps during the visit, and in Moscow, González will be speaking on behalf of the European Union, maybe the keys will be found to resolve the aggravated problem. Public Russian television from Madrid, Igor Kudrin, Valery Ivanov. Greenpeace ships near the atoll Mururoa are becoming more active, and just now it was learned that 2 environmental ships have broken into the direct proximity of the lagoon of the atoll. For another storming of the restricted zone around the French polygons in the Pacific atolls of Mururoa and Fangatov, a flotilla sailed out consisting of 11 yachts, the crews of which by any means are attempting to impede the resumption of nuclear testing. It's expected that tomorrow the flotilla will enter the 12-mile restricted zone, hoping to chart its route between 2 atolls, despite the warnings of the French authorities. As is known, on Friday, they, in this closed zone, seized the basic blow force of the environmentalists, 2 well-equipped ships of the international organization Greenpeace, which were boarded and then tugged off to Port Hayol, belonging to Paris. On Sunday, such a fate befell the French yacht with 3 crew members on board. All of the arrested environmentalists could be fined or imprisoned for a period of between 3 months to a year. Currently, at the border of the restricted zone, 1 more ship is circulating of the New Zealand Navy, the Atui. Increasing tension Sunday evening was heightened by information from that ship about the fact that on Mururoa already, ostensibly, a nuclear explosion was conducted. The sensational information later was refuted by French authorities and seismic stations of the region, which had already made the conclusion that the panic was caused by by an enormous fish which got caught on the underground microphone and transmitter of the Atui ship. However, the false alarm did not at all cancel the anxious anticipation, because it's clear to everyone that the first tests in the bowels of the Morarwa and Fangatov will be heard in the near future. French intends overall by May of next year to conduct between 7 or 8 nuclear explosions at these polygons. Meanwhile, the deputies of highest legislative bodies from 13 countries who are on the Pacific island of Tahiti to participate in the protest actions decided to create an international federation of parliamentarians for a non-nuclear world, which would have as its main purpose to make Paris and Beijing completely refuse to hold any more nuclear tests. Representatives of Greenpeace Russia today began a unique storming of the French embassy in Moscow, and this time the demonstration acquired a nature of a theatrical presentation. Everything was according to scenario. A rare case, Greenpeace even applied for a permit to conduct the action, but not waiting for an official response. There was no time. Pedestrians could see President Chirac collecting money for the explosion, and 3 deaths supporting the president. A table with a countdown before the explosion. 12 participants of the action within seconds unfurled a placard and began to collect signatures for a petition to ban the nuclear tests. We began our protest actions back in July at the French embassy, where we handed in our petition and even met with the French ambassador. But today, these actions are held everywhere because, according to our information, it's possible in the next few hours and even moments the first explosion of the series of planned nuclear tests will occur. The reaction of the pedestrians was predictable. Chirac fans in the Russian capital turned out to be very few. A clear indicator is the demilitarization of Russians. No one of the official embassy representatives came out for the meeting either. Also, the reaction of the militia was predictable, which in an hour came to perform their duties. 9 of the 12 participants of the action were taken to the 2nd Division of the militia. However, today only one of the scenarios was acted out. The Greenpeace environmentalists await a permit from the authorities for the next action. Completely supporting the actions of Greenpeace, however, one must note that such actions require money. On that topic, a report from Volgograd district. This picture is probably not familiar to each one of our automobile drivers. A person with a rod in hand in a strange uniform with strange decals stops you somewhere on the road and suggests that you pay a so-called environmental collection. Through what districts have you already traveled? The Rostov for now. And did you have to pay there? Yes, I paid at the Kalitvinsky post for the environment. How much did you pay? 5,000. And now the second time again? Yes, probably. Well, I was told to pay 2,000. $10. They demanded dollars from you? If you're interested on the basis of what laws do such collections occur, you will learn an interesting, amazing thing. On the basis of the decisions of regional administrations and depending on the appetite of the local authorities, you will be required to pay a corresponding sum, perhaps even in currency. The collected funds, as a rule, are commercial secret. How much money sits into the pockets of the collectors themselves and how much goes for other purposes is also a riddle. Nearby, a traffic policeman gave us advice in this matter. They still have no right to stop you, therefore just don't react and drive on. The question about the internment of the remains of the family of the last Russian Emperor Nicholas II may be decided in the near future, so Interfax was told by the criminalist prosecutor of the Prosecutor General of Russia, Vladimir Solovyov. However, according to Solovyov, the term of the investigation of the matter may be extended because the investigation needs to undertake several actions to clarify the circumstances of the execution of the royal family. But according to Solovyov, the term of the investigation are in no way connected with questions of identifying the remains, which will permit the State Commission to review the question about the internment. And more information from history. Ancient Ryazan has turned exactly 900 years, and today in the city, the festivities began dedicated to the anniversary. 9 centuries ago, the grandson of the Kievan prince, St. Vladimir, Yaroslav, founded on this site a small wooden fortress, and he called it Pereslavl-Ryazanski. And in 1778, by edict of the Empress Catherine II, the city was given the current name Ryazan. Today, few people know that in Russia there were actually 2 Ryazans. The first was located in a completely different spot, and its fate was quite tragic. In the 13th century, The Batia hordes attacking it burned it to the ground and massacred the residents, and those who survived were sent into slavery. Since then, the old Rizan forever would disappear from the face of the earth. The capital of the princedom, together with the name, was transported here, and so Perislavl became Rizan. During its 9 centuries of history, the city several times was attacked by various enemies, burned to the ground, but each time it arose from the ash because of the unbelievable determination and love of work of its residents. And even now, despite the economic difficulties, the Rizan residents are returning to their city, its former beauty, having repaired and restored many of the ancient estates, being restored and soon to open its doors as the famous merchants' ranks, the legacy of the Rizan merchants. On the eve of the anniversary, many streets have been given back their historical names. Near the Kremlin, in honor of the 900th anniversary of the city, a chapel has been built. During the festive week, also opened here will be the monument to General Skobelev, and on the site of Old Rizan, a commemorative marble cross will be erected. And now I have left just to thank you for your attention and remind you of the main events of the day. An accident has occurred at the Pervomayskaya mine. According to preliminary accounts, a minimum of 15 people have died. In Chechnya, it was decided to postpone elections. At the meeting in Grozny, the Chechen side was presented grievances over the unceasing shooting. The necessary number of signatures have been collected of deputies of the State Duma of Russia to convene an urgent session on the Yugoslavian problem. In Beijing, the World Congress of Women has opened. Good evening on Channel 1, the Sports News. The time of the deciding matches at the American Tennis Open is beginning. Briefly about the events of the last day. Pete Sampras is now in the 1/8 final after his strenuous 4-set match with the Australian Mark Philippoussis. This player is one of those young ones who could do much damage, said one of the favorites of the current tournament. The last year's finalist, Michael Stich, confidently paved his path into the 1/8 with the victory of the Australian Scott Draper. The confusion in the first set did not stop Thomas Muster from doing the same. Confidently in her match with Steffi Graf and Aranka Sanchez Vicario, however, did lose to Mary Jo Fernandez. And now about soccer. Yesterday, 2 kickout matches were held for the European Championships. The leader of the 4th group, the Croat team, demolished the Estonians at home. 7 balls flew into the goal of the Estonian team, which managed only with 1. You can see the most impressive goals. We'll note that the Croats have again confirmed the power of their attack, where each player is a star. 3 scores for Davor Šuker. Hence, the Croatian team has received the planned 3 points, but nonetheless, the deciding match for the first place will be the Croat-Italian match, the 8th of October. The leader of the 6th group, the team of Portugal, hosted the Northern Ireland team. The hosts opened the score but couldn't widen the gap after that, and on the other hand, missed a response goal with an excellent hit from the penalty line. It was scored by Michael Hughes. The score 1-1. Last weekend, the first matches of the Championship of Spain were held. You can see on your screen some of the goals which brought victory for the champions, the Madrid Real, in the match away from home against the Rayo Vallecano. The Madridians won 5-1 and, moreover, did not even kick the penalty yet. With the first game, Real demonstrated its serious ambitions to repeat the success of the last season. And now about events on the territory of the former USSR. In Tashkent, the first Central Asian Games have opened. A report about this from our personal ETA correspondent in Uzbekistan, Shahnuza Ganiva. Today, we don't need competitions in the areas of weapons and destruction. Mankind needs stability and peace, whose authorized ambassador is considered to be sports, said the president of Uzbekistan, Islam Karimov, opening the first Central Asian Games. Probably for the first time in the last few years at the tribunes of the central largest stadium of the capital, Bokhtakor, as they say, one couldn't squeeze a finger in. More than 60,000 viewers welcomed the athletes of 5 Central Asian republics, during the course of a week, according to the Olympic Charter, they will compete in 12 forms of sports. At the first Central Asian Games, the Olympic fire from ancient Helada was brought in the stadium in an enormous cup. It was taken along a tight wire by a representative of the famous dynasty of tightrope walkers, Takin Toshkinbayev. Sports has an ability to unite people, and I'm very happy that being present at this grandiose celebration in Uzbekistan, possibly with time, Tashkent will become the Olympic capital, said Juan Antonio Samaranch. We continue our broadcast. In the beginning of the current season, the hockey team of Russia, for now, isn't pleasing its fans. Unusually unsuccessful this time was our team's performance at the Prague Bank Cup in the Czech capital. After being defeated in the first two matches by the Swedes and Czechs with the score 1-4, the Russians lost in the last game to the Slovak team 2-5. It's curious that the Slovakian team only last year won the right to participate in the World Championship in Group A, and to date, our team had not lost to that team. The winner of the tournament was the Czech team. Despite the fact that in the last match it lost to the Swedes 1-3, the Czechs had a better difference and scored and missed goals. In the first place is the Czech team, the second year, and the second Sweden, and the third Slovakia, and the Russian team is in fourth place. That was the sports news on Channel 1, and remember how Vysotsky said, all of them have a striking right, my striking foot is my left. Probably the Croatian team player, goalie, could not figure out which foot was which, for which he ended up having to pay. Watch carefully. Good evening. The residents of the European part of our country, nature generously is granting them warmth. In many areas of Russia, the first days of September have been 5 to 7 degrees higher than the average norm. In the central Chernozem area along the Volga, the temperatures reached plus 30 degrees. Even in the north, in the Arkhangels district, it was higher than 20 degrees. And such weather was brought by a broad anticyclone whose center for several days has been located over the Volga-Vyansk area. And although it is gradually dissipating, slowly moving out to the east, tomorrow, under its influence, still will be the eastern and northern parts of European Russia, where it will continue to be warm with some brief thunderstorms. In the Volga-Vyansk area, plus 23 to 28. In the Republic of Komi and the Arkhangels district, plus 18 to 23. On the Kola Peninsula, 16 to 21 degrees. In Karelia, the Leningrad district, the west and center of Russia, there will be the influence of atmospheric fronts. The cloud cover will increase. There will be some isolated rains and thunderstorms, with temperatures of 20 to 25. The Baltic states from the southwest are being approached by a small cyclone. Therefore, the rain here is more intense, and the air temperatures will not exceed plus 16 to 21 degrees. This same cyclone and atmospheric front will bring thunderstorms to Belarus, the west of Ukraine, and to Moldova, where during the day the temperatures will be plus 19 to 24. In the east of Ukraine and in the central Chernozem region, in the zone of a lethargic front, there will be some isolated brief torrential rains with day temperatures of 22 to 27. Along the Volga, with southeasterly winds, dry and warm air is moving in. Rain is unlikely, plus 25 to 30. In the south of Russia, some brief periods of torrential rains with 24 to 29. On the Black Sea coast, thunderstorms. Temperature of the air, 24 to 29 degrees. Temperature of the water, 22 to 25 degrees. Hot, plus 29 to 34 beyond the Caucasus. In St. Petersburg, partly cloudy sky with some possibility of brief rain at night, 13 to 15 during the day, 20 to 22. In Moscow, it will continue to be warm with some light thunderstorms at night, plus 14 to 16 during the day, 23 to 25 degrees. This is the weather that's expected for the 5th of September. All the best.